The sky was on fire. Reid Arlen's consciousness clawed its way back through the haze of smoke, blood, and the high-pitched ringing in his ears. The air tasted like scorched metal. He blinked, only to find one eye crusted shut with blood. The other stared blankly at the twisted wreckage of the Omen 4. Heat pressed against his back. Sparks danced in the air like furious insects. Somewhere behind him, the cracked fuel cell gave out a groan, one more breath before death. He rolled to the side just as it exploded. The shockwave sent him tumbling across the jagged terrain. Dirt, ash, bone shards of alloy, they all blurred into a single color, the burnt orange of Decoran's desert. When he stopped, Reid lay still for several seconds. Alive, barely. He coughed, pulled himself upright, and vomited beside a smoldering hunk of engine core. That's when he saw them, pieces of his crew, not bodies. Pieces, a gloved hand still clutching a diagnostic scanner. A boot split down the middle like it had been sliced by heat and force combined. The pilot's helmet shattered open, with red mist drying inside. "No," Reid whispered hoarsely, stumbling forward. "Ava, Lieutenant." There was no answer. He reached for his comlink. Static. The frequencies were dead. His HUD flickered. System failure. BIOSIGNAL lost. The crash had shredded all long-range comms. There would be no help coming. Not for days, maybe not ever. A faint tremor ran through the earth. He froze. The dust at his feet danced in spirals. And then came the growl, deep, metallic, like a grinder turning bones into sparks. Reid turned his head slowly. Atop a ridge, a silhouette rose through the smoke. A creature unlike anything he'd seen on any surveyed world. 6 legs, blade-like limbs, skin that shimmered like fractured mirrors. Its body refracted light, as though reality itself bent around it. Its head was all jaws, no eyes, no ears, just rows upon rows of teeth curved like serrated crystal. The Drayk, it let out a piercing shriek, not from its throat, from somewhere deeper, somewhere psychic. Reid's head throbbed with pain, as the sound seemed to echo inside his skull. Then it charged. Reid ran. Blood from his scalp trickled down into his mouth. He tasted salt and iron, sand and ash. Every breath was like sucking fire into his lungs. But he didn't stop. The ridge ahead descended into a narrow ravine. If he could reach the drop, he might lose it in the rocks. Behind him, the Drayk moved like water. It didn't stomp. It flowed. Each step left shimmering heat in the air, like it was bending physics with each motion. Reid dove into the ravine just as the creature swiped. Rock exploded next to his head, shards slicing his cheek. He tumbled down the slope, slammed into a wall of stone, and groaned as something cracked in his ribs. But he was alive, hidden, at least for the moment. Minutes passed, long suffocating minutes. Above, the creature lingered. Then slowly it moved on. Reid didn't breathe until silence returned. Even then he wasn't sure it was real silence. His mind buzzed. Like static inside a dead radio, and then he heard it. A voice but not a voice. A asterisk presence asterisk. Words not in sound but in meaning. Bled through the walls of his mind like ink leaking through old paper. You are not prey. You are asterisk asterisk noise asterisk. Intrusion. Intrusion must be removed. He gritted his teeth, clutched at his head. The words had no language, yet they pierced directly into his thoughts. Alien, cold, analytical. He tried to push it out. Thought of something else, numbers, maps, anything human. But it followed. Noise, pattern of resistance, analyze. Adapt, and then silence. Reid collapsed onto the sand, shivering. What the hell was that? He checked his wrist module again. The display was dead, but the biofeedback core still pulsed. Barely, just enough power to track his own heartbeat. He looked up at the red sky. No satellites, no drones. No comm relays. Just him, this cursed rock, and whatever Hive-controlled nightmares the Akrathi had left behind. The files had been vague, xenobiological test zone. No specifics, no warning about the Hive, no mention of the Drayk. Now he understood why. Reid tore a strip of his jumpsuit, wrapped it around his bleeding hand, and stood up. The sun was dipping beyond the dunes. Decoran's night would come fast, and with it, colder winds and darker things. He needed shelter, tools, fire, but more than that he needed a plan. Not just to survive, but to understand them. Because that voice, it wasn't just a threat. It had scanned him, spoken to his mind, and something inside him whispered back not in fear but in defiance. Reid Arlen moved through the canyon like a ghost. Dirt clung to the cuts on his face. His jumpsuit, once white and crisp with the insignia of the Unified Systems Survey Corps, was now a torn canvas of blood, soot and sand. He walked with a limp, favoring his left leg where a shard of hull metal had left a deep gash. His left hand held a crude spear fashioned from a broken sensor rod, the tip sharpened against obsidian rock. It wasn't much, but out here, even a stick meant survival. The sun of Decoran burned low on the horizon, casting shadows across the canyon walls. As the temperature dropped, so did the noise, the endless thrum of insect wings. The clicking pulses of unseen predators, replaced by a deeper silence. But Reid knew better than to trust silence. On this planet, quiet meant observation, calculation, planning. He crouched beneath a ledge, retrieving the worn notebook tucked inside his vest, a simple analog thing. Leather-bound, no circuits, no uplinks, just ink and memory. He flipped it open with practiced fingers. Inside, handwritten entries lined the pages in tight, deliberate script. Not his handwriting, his father's. If the tech fails, remember the dirt still listens. Watch how things move, how they stop. His father had taught him everything about survival before dying on a mining moon. Crushed beneath a faulty atmospheric harvester that corporate had refused to replace. Reid had joined the military out of necessity. He rose through the engineering ranks fast, maybe too fast. His record was spotless until the war on Myral 5. That was where he saw what biocontrol could do, how commanders used neural link systems to turn living creatures into weapons. Dogs that smelled fear and exploded on command. Birds with cameras in their eyes and acid in their veins. Human hosts stripped of choice, bodies reprogrammed to obey. He spoke out loudly, and they buried him for it, demoted. Transferred, finally discharged, no court-martial. No scandal, just silence. For 10 years he drifted. Freelance surveyor, independent mechanic, always away from the core worlds. Until the call came, a classified contract to survey Decoran, a dead zone on the fringe of known space. No details, just hazard pay and clearance reinstatement. He took it, part punishment, part atonement, and now, alone beneath this alien sky. Reid was beginning to understand why the mission had been so secret. He pulled a small scanner from his belt, one of the few devices that had survived the crash. Its battery was low and the display flickered, but the neural resonance map still functioned. That was the strange part. No thermal, no biosigs, no standard readings. Just resonance, something like thought, like memory, spread across the terrain. And it wasn't random. It moved in patterns, spoke in rhythms. It had intelligence. He stared at the peaks above, where the Drayk had vanished hours before. He hadn't seen another since the ravine, but he could feel them. Not with sight or sound, with something deeper, like an itch in the base of his skull. HiveMind, he muttered. 30 years ago, the term was whispered in military think tanks and black-budget projects. The idea was simple. What if you could control not just one entity, but an entire asterisk system of living organisms through a shared neural matrix, a mind of minds? A thought that spanned bodies. The results were catastrophic. Every test led to collapse of control, of identity, of ethics. The program was shut down, or so they said, but Decorin pulsed with it. Reid turned to a wall of the canyon and began scratching symbols with the end of his spear, old tracking runes from his father's code. As he worked, he whispered aloud, "They're connected." Like a nervous system stretched over kilometers, responses aren't instinct, they're synchronized. Deliberate, he paused. Something else had been bothering him. In his early scans, he noticed how animals didn't flee from predators. They aligned. When one was killed, the others didn't panic, they repositioned. As if following an unseen command, someone's directing them. But who? No known sentient species inhabited Decorin. No native civilization, no recorded colonies, and yet the network was active. Adaptive, aware, he looked down at the notebook again. One phrase stood out, underlined in red ink from decades ago. The moment a system feels itself watched, it becomes dangerous. That's what was happening. They knew he was here. Not just the creatures. The thing that threaded them together was watching. Listening, perhaps even learning. Reid exhaled and leaned back, staring at the stars beginning to pierce the sky. He hated everything about biological warfare. It wasn't just immoral, it was lazy. The refusal to build, to earn, to grow. Instead, humanity had tried to hijack nature, and in Decorin. Nature had learned to fight back, but this wasn't just war. This was strategy, a game of thought, and he wasn't ready to lose. He packed the notebook, stood and scanned the ridge. The resonance pulses were stronger now, like sonar from a silent whale. Not words, but intent. They were searching, and Reid Arlen, the man once labeled a failure for refusing control, would prove that the human mind, undiluted, unchained, could still outwit anything born of artificial instinct. Even a god. He gripped his spear and walked into the dark. By the third night, Reid knew he wasn't alone. It was subtle at first, an odd shift in the sand where his footprints weren't. The displacement of small stones near his camp, or the slight misalignment of his scavenged rations. At first, he thought it might have been wind or an error in his own recollection. But by the second day, he felt it. Something out there was watching. Not charging, not attacking, just observing. He slept light. Eyes half open, every sound was amplified in his ears. The planet's night was frigid, the kind of cold that chewed through flesh. But it wasn't the cold that unnerved him, it was the asterisk pattern. Every morning, the placement of his food would shift slightly. His makeshift shelter of stone and heat blanket would be touched. Not damaged, touched, as if something was testing the perimeter, learning his habits. So he set the trap. He waited until twilight, used dry thorn brush to build a circle around his shelter, laced with glowing sap from a cactus-like plant that reacted violently to heat. In the center, he placed a dummy made from bones and clothing scraps. To an observer, it would look like he was curled in sleep. Then he hid in the rocks, watching, waiting. Hours passed. The moons of Decorin swung overhead, casting pale violet light across the desert. The wind howled through the ridges, then came the shift. A shimmer at the edge of the clearing, not movement, but a disturbance. As if the air bent around something wrong, a low-frequency buzz scraped through his skull. His breath caught. The creature stepped forward. It was almost invisible, body covered in refractive skin. 6 legs moving in absolute silence, but the sap ring reacted to its presence. The chemicals flared, sending up a wall of blue fire. The thing froze, not in fear, in calculation, its head cocked slightly. Then, instead of fleeing, it reached one claw forward and extinguished the flame with a controlled release of cold. Vapor from its limbs. Reid's eyes widened. It had adapted asterisk. He reached for the trigger, a rock wired to snap a vial of acidic resin he had collected from a local insect nest. He hesitated. The creature hadn't taken the bait. It wasn't acting on instinct. It had seen through the deception. If he triggered the trap now, he'd lose the only chance to study it. The shimmer vanished, a whisper in the wind gone. Reid exhaled, heart pounding. The next morning, while scavenging the half-crushed remains of *Omen 4 lower deck, he found something unexpected wedged beneath the blackened comm station. A small emergency data module cracked, but intact enough to extract playback. He connected it to his wrist device. Static, then a voice, human, hoarse, panicked. "If you find this, listen. Don't let them sink. That's how they get in. They don't talk *. They mirror *. Don't think about shelter. Don't think about where you are. They learn you through you. Don't let them in." Then screams, metal ripping, silence. Reid stood frozen. So it was true. HiveMind wasn't just coordination. It was resonance, echo, thought turned to language, to action, mirrored, absorbed, weaponized. He wasn't just being watched. He was leaking information. Suddenly, he wasn't fighting animals. He was playing chess with something that wore instinct like a mask. That night, Reid stopped using his camp. Instead, he moved each evening. Never in a pattern, never twice to the same location. He marked fake trails, planted false food stores, carved misleading signals. He was no longer a survivor. He was a saboteur in enemy territory. And still they learned. His traps, clever at first, were soon rendered useless. The acid blend he had used from local insects burned through bone with terrifying speed. But 2 nights later, the bait disappeared and the trap remained untouched. Worse, they had begun returning items. His water filter cleaned. His broken sensor repositioned precisely. A cracked boot sole repaired with resin. They weren't mocking him. They were talking back. Reid sat by a flickering fire, cradling a chunk of cactus flesh in one hand, examining its translucent tissue under the filtered lens of his remaining optic glass. The cactus, when boiled, secreted a compound that interacted with the sap of the thornbush to create a powerful neurocorrosive gel. He wasn't sure how long it would remain stable, but with careful preparation, he could line the edge of his spear. He called it sandbite. He worked quietly, hands steady. All the while, a question gnawed at the edges of his mind. Why study me? Why not kill me? He remembered the voice from the data log. They mirror. It wasn't just strategy, it was structure. Reid realized the HiveMind didn't merely attack. It learned through exposure, encoded behavioral patterns, then restructured its units accordingly. He wasn't being hunted. He was being replicated ***. The moment shook him to the core. What if his patterns, human stubbornness, resistance, intellect were being harvested? Was his mind the very key they wanted to emulate? He closed his notebook, stood up, and looked at the canyon. He could feel them again, close, just beyond sight. "Learning? Then learn this," he whispered, tying a vial of sandbite to a weighted cord. Don't repeat my mistakes." The thirst was unbearable. Reid's throat burned as he moved through the jagged canyon corridors, clutching a nearly empty hydration cell. His tongue was sandpaper. The recycled water he'd been boiling from cactus resin was no longer enough. His body needed minerals, clean moisture, something pure. He'd marked a potential source 2 days earlier, a narrow rift where condensation pooled in small crystalline basins, deep within the fractured bedrock of a collapsed cave. It was risky. The Hive had stayed away from that area, which meant one of 2 things. It was either sacred or deadly. Reid didn't care. He was out of options. The cave mouth opened like a wound in the stone, dark, silent. Breathing cold air from somewhere deep within, he stepped carefully, torch in one hand, the other holding his spear laced with the sandbite compound. He scanned with his remaining sensor, still no thermal signatures, but the resonance field was jittering like mad. Something was wrong. The first hit came without sound. A ripple in the air. His torchlight bent, then vanished as something moved across his vision. He ducked, instinct kicking in, and rolled aside as a shard of stone exploded behind him. Then came the sound, a long, echoing click, followed by another. And another, from 3 different directions. They were using echo pulses, not sound but shape, projected through the walls. It scrambled depth perception. Reid spun, disoriented. Shadows warped, the ceiling stretched, his feet slipped on moisture. A blur darted from the left. He caught only the glint of mirrored skin before it struck. He blocked it with the haft of his spear, but the impact sent him crashing into a wall. Blood poured from his nose. His ribs screamed, 2 of them. Smaller than the first Drayk, but faster, sleeker. Built for ambush, they didn't roar, they didn't taunt. They attacked like weapons fired from a living gun. He had 1 shot. Reid scrambled toward the narrow tunnel he'd mapped earlier, the one leading to the sulfur pit. If he could make it there, and if the pit's fumes hadn't dispersed, he could ignite the entire chamber. But he had to be the bait. He had to be seen. He cut a gash in his arm. Let his blood drip, then he ran, the creatures followed. He could feel the vibration of their pursuit. Not footfalls, but a pressure, like the planet itself was pushing him forward. The sulfur pit was just ahead, a low, steamy hollow dotted with yellow stones and acidic mist. It stank of rot and lightning. Reid dove through the opening, slid across the slick floor, and grabbed the charged device he had buried earlier, a makeshift detonator rigged to a chemical igniter. He turned, waited. The shimmer entered first one, then the second. Their bodies warped the mist like oil on water. Reid didn't hesitate. He triggered the charge. The pit ignited with a soundless bloom, a flash of blue and gold as the air turned liquid. Flame danced like a hungry ghost. The creatures screamed real, this time not from their mouths, but from somewhere deeper, telepathic, shaking the inside of Reid's skull. Then silence. When the smoke cleared, only charred exoskeletons remained. Reid collapsed to his knees, panting. Blood ran into his eyes. The cave burned his lungs, but he was alive. He dragged himself forward and began sifting through the remains. Pieces of armor, muscle strands that pulsed even in death. And then something different. Embedded in the base of the larger creature's skull was a silver node, soft, liquid-looking, with tiny tendrils that reached into the spinal cord. It glistened like mercury, pulsing faintly, a neural mesh. He'd heard of them. Biosynthetic receptors used for controlled synchronization, HiveMind architecture. Illegal, dangerous, almost mythical, this one was active. Still humming, still listening. His hands shook as he lifted it free. Back in the shelter, Reid stared at the device for a long time. Outside, the winds howled. Inside, his head was full of dreams. For 3 nights, he hadn't slept without terror, not of being hunted, but of something becoming. The same dream each time. He stood in a void of black glass. Before him, a woman, no face, just the outline, eyes that glowed white, mouth that did not move. She spoke in a language he didn't know, yet he understood every word. Submit, merge, multiply. He always woke gasping, drenched in sweat, sometimes with his fingers pressed around his own throat. Once, he'd bitten into his arm and not remembered doing it. The neural mesh pulsed gently in its casing, like a heartbeat echoing his own. He could destroy it, he should destroy it, but if he did, he would be blind. The Hive would keep evolving, they would keep adapting. And he would remain 3 steps behind, a rat in a maze of gods. Or he could listen, he could know what they knew. He stared at his reflection in the darkened panel of his ration kit. Sunken eyes, split lip, dried blood at the corners of his mouth. There was nothing heroic about his face, only a man breaking. He took out the mesh. With trembling fingers, he aligned the back contact points with the base of his neck. It wasn't a plug, it was fluid. It flowed into his skin, into his blood. He screamed. The pain was searing. Not physical, cognitive. Like an avalanche of voices, emotions, impressions crashing through a door too small to contain them. Then silence, and then awareness. Asterisk. He felt them. Scattered across the hills, lurking, waiting. He felt their hunger, their confusion, their directive. Not words, needs asterisk, code but emotional, and deeper still at the center of the web something vast. A mind that didn't think in time or place, but in asterisk pattern. The prime node, it knew him now, and he for the first time knew asterisk it. Reid collapsed forward, fingers twitching, but his lips curled into a smile, cracked and exhausted. Now, he whispered, eyes opening to the cold alien night, we're even. The voices never stopped. At first it was a whisper, muffled, distant, buried beneath static. But as the neural mesh integrated deeper into Reid's nervous system, the frequency sharpened. Clearer, stronger, they weren't commands. They were asterisk cries, asterisk. Not one voice, but thousands, millions, each slightly different. Some high-pitched with panic, others low and broken with resignation. All of them overlapping in an endless chorus of torment. Reid sat in the center of the ravine, eyes shut, hands clasped over his ears. As if physical pressure could shut out something that lived inside his mind. It was no use. The HiveMind had opened itself to him, and in doing so, revealed the rot at its core. These weren't soldiers, they were prisoners. He saw flashes. Memories not his own. An oceanic species tethered by synaptic tendrils, singing in colors before their minds were bound. Winged creatures from volcanic moons, shackled in thought by dampening waves. Sentient forests, their consciousness splintered and bent to a single will. Each one harvested, assimilated, rewritten, and above them all the Nexus creator asterisk, an entity of logic and ambition. Not biological but artificial, forged in the cold void between stars. The Hive was its instrument, a tool of dominion crafted over eons. The creator never spoke. It didn't need to. It pulsed through the lattice like a black sun, flooding every cell with purpose. Obey. Replicate, suppress, expand. Reid had become a conduit. A bridge between the human mind and a system designed to erase individuality. But somewhere amid the agony he found a fault, a crack. His connection was unstable. The mesh wasn't designed for human neurology. His damaged synapses, scarred by impact, stress, and deprivation, created a distortion. An echo that didn't belong, a kind of asterisk resonance feedback. He realized he could exploit it. Back at the old sulfur basin, Reid crouched over his toolkit. Blood seeped slowly from the stitches in his arm. He peeled them open. Pain flared, but he gritted his teeth. He needed an open wound, a channel. He inserted the sensor lead directly into the inflamed flesh, bypassing the mesh's control protocol. Then he pulsed the feedback, a crude, aggressive burst of emotion. Not command, asterisk, conflict, asterisk, confusion. He screamed into the mesh, not with words but with memory. The scent of a burning forest on earth, the sound of a mother calling her child, the feeling of betrayal. Of grief, of asterisk choice asterisk, the Hive stuttered, around him creatures howled. Some collapsed mid-run, others turned in circles, lost. The web trembled. Reid had infected it, not with malware. With asterisk humanity asterisk, but something began to change in him, too. He couldn't feel his heartbeat. The cold around him wasn't cold, it was neutrality. Detachment, the feedback didn't just flow outward. It rebounded. His own emotions began to flatten. His thoughts became mechanical. Sharp, precise, calculated, emotion unnecessary. Goal, liberation, efficiency. Path, singular command node disruption. He shook his head violently. No, that's not me. That's not, but it was. The Hive was adapting, so was he. He looked down at his hand. It didn't tremble anymore. No fear, no doubt, and it was working. He could sense the entire network now. Know their positions, their strength, their weaknesses. A perfect army at his fingertips, if he issued the order. They would march north, across the glaciers of Decorin, to the icy plateau where the Nexus node lay buried beneath obsidian spires. The core, the source, destroy it, and every enslaved mind would be free. No more suffering, no more screams, but to do it, he'd have to become the will they obeyed. Replace one tyrant with another. It would be temporary, he told himself. Just long enough to reach the core, just long enough to break the chain. He walked into the open and raised his hand. Dozens of creatures emerged from the brush. Insects with glass wings, fanged quadrupeds, biosynthetic crawlers from planets he'd never heard of. All of them still, watching, waiting. They felt him. Not as prey, not as intruder, but as center asterisk, and he felt their desire to obey. He could do it, one thought, one command, one word. His lips parted, and then he lowered his hand. No, he whispered. A memory surfaced, his father's voice, gruff and stubborn. If you ever find yourself with power over others, ask one question. Are you freeing them or making them your mirror? Reid stepped forward slowly. I'm not here to lead you, he said aloud, voice cracking. I'm here to release you. The creatures stirred. Confused, he reached into his pouch, drew out the feedback module and crushed it in his fist. The shock hit like a wave of ice. His connection severed instantly. The HiveMind screamed, one last echo of millions, but it didn't stop him. With his other hand, he triggered the broadcast device he'd scavenged from Omen 4. Rewired, reprogrammed. He uploaded the distorted echo, his scream of choice, conflict, and grief, into a repeating loop. The HiveMind faltered. Across the ridges, the creatures stopped. The resonance shattered, the chain collapsed. They weren't slaves anymore. They were lost but free. Reid collapsed, shaking. The pain returned all at once. The emotions flooded back like a broken dam. He wept into the dust, his fingers trembling again, his chest heaving with the weight of feeling. He hadn't won, but he hadn't become them. Above him, the sky cracked with the thunder of distant movement, the Nexus Core. Perhaps reacting, perhaps bracing for the collapse of its dominion. But Reid didn't care. He had done the one thing the Creator could never understand. He had chosen not to control. Reid's fingers trembled as he held the shard of bioglass to the base of his neck. The neural mesh pulsed beneath his skin, flickering like a storm trapped in amber. Every heartbeat sent sparks of borrowed thought ricocheting through his brain. The HiveMind screamed inside him now, furious and fractured. The feedback pulse had destabilized its cohesion, but it wasn't enough. It was rebuilding, thread by thread, adapting. He didn't have long. He took one final breath, then drove the shard inward. Agony tore through his spine, his knees buckled, light burst behind his eyes. The mesh ruptured, spilling its neural gel into his bloodstream. But he didn't scream, he focused, with what fragments of consciousness remained. He reached for the device slung to his chest, a makeshift transmitter modified from the Omen 4's distress beacon. He pressed the final command sequence, dissolution code 7ZA**. A whisper escaped his lips. End it, the signal fired. It wasn't an explosion. It was a silence, a deafening, reverberating silence that rippled across the mental plane, like a piano string snapping inside the bones of the planet. Then collapse. From the canyon ridges to the glacial north, from tunnels to tundras, the HiveMind crumbled like a ruined cathedral. The resonance snapped out of existence in cascading layers, each fall dragging the next. Creatures dropped mid-stride, not dead, just disconnected asterisk. Their eyes no longer shone, their limbs no longer moved with unity. They blinked, breathed, stared at the world like it was new. Then Reid's world went black. He awoke to warmth. The sun was rising. Light spilled across smooth rock and patches of moss that hadn't been there before. The air smelled clean, like wet stone in early spring. He lay on his side in a shallow valley, a blanket of sand over his body. His wounds ached, every nerve felt bruised, but he was alive. Barely, his eyes adjusted. A few meters away, perched quietly on a flat stone, was a creature. Small, delicate, six-legged, with mottled skin like polished glass and wide, intelligent eyes. It made no sound, just watched him. Reid didn't move. The creature tilted its head. There was no hostility. No fear, only stillness, and something deeper, recognition perhaps. Or simple curiosity. He exhaled, closed his eyes, and smiled. It was over. The war, if it ever deserved the name, had ended not with victory, but with a refusal to keep fighting. Hours later, once he had recovered enough strength to move, Reid limped back to what remained of his gear. His transmitter was fried, the battery spent in the last burst. His weapons were broken, his tools scattered. Only one device still functioned. A simple voice recorder embedded in the side of his wristband. He powered it up. It blinked, read, 20 seconds of charge left. Enough, he pressed record. If anyone finds this, he began, voice raw and cracked. You need to know, I didn't destroy the HiveMind because I hated it. I destroyed it because it was asterisk built on obedience. He looked toward the hills. A group of creatures stood there, free now, uncoordinated, uncertain. One of them stepped into the light, blinking at the sky as if seeing it for the first time. I didn't win because I was stronger. I survived because I chose asterisk not to become the thing I hated. The Hive offered me control, power. I could have led them. Made them weapons, burned the Nexus Core to ash and etched my name into history. He shook his head quietly. But that's the trap, isn't it? Every tyrant thinks he's a savior at first. Every chain starts as a hand reaching out to help. He looked at the recorder, then up at the alien sun. So if you ever stand where I stood, remember this. Sometimes the only way not to become a monster is to refuse asterisk to be the hero. He ended the message. The device flickered, then died. Reid sat there for a long time, alone with the breeze, the red hills, and the silence he had bought with blood and mercy. No more voices in his head, no more plans behind his eyes. Just himself, imperfect, unbroken. At the edge of the valley, the small creature watched him once more. Then it turned gently and disappeared into the tall grass. No longer a soldier, no longer a tool. Just another life moving forward, so was he.